Have you ever wondered why sometimes you're able to predict the future, more specifically, the future that is quite immediate? Some call it intuition, some people are better at it, especially if you are a neurodivergent who is very sensitive to stimuli. Well, it turns out that most of it we are learning that has to do with how the brain is designed to function. And one of the major components and jobs of the brain is actually to predict the immediate future outcome, mainly because we are a species of survivors. And so it's extremely important for the brain to have the capability to be able to predict what might come. And the way in which it does that, we're still learning a lot about how the brain works, but one of the way in which it does that is that it does analysis of all the information that it has been able to gather for that specific topic under a period of time, and neural oscillation, aka brain waves, and more specifically beta waves frequency, appear to have a lot to do with this. Let me explain. The scientific terminology of this phenomena that the brain is able to predict immediate future is called predictive routing. And here is how we could summarize what predictive routing could be explained as. It is the idea that you form predictions based on your past experiences. So these predictions make perception and cognition smoother, faster, and easier compared to situations we have not previously encountered. The proposed neural implementation of that is that predictions are associated with different rhythms in the brain. And with rhythms, in this case, we are referring to brain waves, more specifically beta brain waves. And these rhythms associated with predictions are beta waves frequency range around 20 hertz, and they coordinate neurons and can form plastic dynamic ensembles or groupings of neurons, and that is what it is learning. It forms new connections between neurons that did not exist before. Scientists believe that those beta waves frequency ensembles are representing what our current predictions are for us right at this moment. And for example, if you show a person a new book or describe a new idea that they've never seen before, they can quickly make an association based on a combination of current information and past experiences. And so these associations together form new, complex and dynamic predictions of immediate future conducted by the brain. And the scientists' work show that this type of predictive coding is more prevalent in higher order areas like the prefrontal cortex, for example, that we've talked extensively about in this channel, rather than in sensory cortex. When it comes to the brain's ability to do predictive coding, these scientists hypothesize that the beta waves frequencies around 20 hertz inhibits the gamma waves frequencies, which is much higher than beta. And they're getting more and more causal evidence for these phenomena. The gamma waves frequencies are associated with processing of sensory data from the environment. So when you're, for example, forming predictions, you are inhibiting the stuff that you don't need to encode very strongly or pay attention to very strongly, because they are already consistent with what you already know. But when we talk about a top-down or bottom-up processing of information within the brain, we are seeing that the gamma waves frequencies, which are higher in frequencies, are the bottom-up sensory stream, and the beta is the one that controls these activities, these frequency activities within the brain, and it sculpts the flow of sensory information. In other words, beta waves frequency appear to orchestrate how and in which mode the gamma waves frequency, which are higher, let the sensory information from the environment penetrate into the brain. And that is the basis of the predictive routing, which these scientists believe and hypothesize and are testing. These newly published research papers explain how they started the theory of predictive coding that took them into developing better techniques, better scientific methodology to really test this theory of predictive coding. And as it so happens in science, the perfect theories, they always come up against the ugly fact that we still need to push forward into improving our scientific techniques. And so that way we could then test and improve the theories and try to test these different theories. These scientists now have evidence that these predictions of the brain is actually sparse code, with the main driver being the neurons in higher order areas utilizing beta waves frequencies. And now the scientists call it so that the predictive routing, they're seeing that one cycle of the science that goes between theory and experiment is now closing, and other doors are opening in terms of being much more elaborate about the way in which we can test these theories. The field of neuroscience can more or less be categorized into two groups. One group of scientists are the ones that primarily focus on studying the brain as is in terms of the neurons, the physical parts of the brain, action potentials, the chemical releases of various neurotransmitter within the brain. On the other hand, the other group are the ones that primarily focus on the electrical activities of the brain, in this case brain waves, aka neuro oscillation that they are called. And it appears that these two groups are gradually taking baby steps in terms of emerging. One way in which it appears that they seem to be a little bit more or less emerging is when it has to do with traveling waves. We've talked about traveling waves in this channel extensively in the past. These are the brain waves that they still could be alpha, beta, gamma, it doesn't matter, but their differentiator of these traveling waves is that they travel from one region of the brain to the other. So for example, when you just talk about neurooscillation, it could be localized, let's say just within the PFC, prefrontal cortex. Let's just say it as an example. But a traveling waves is, for example, those neurooscillations, those brainwaves frequency that travel, let's say, from prefrontal cortex all the way to occipital lobe. And it appears that these traveling waves have more or less something to do with this orchestrating the activities of the neurons. For example, when neurons get excited and they're on, and when they are inhibited and they're off. In other words, the action potential, etc. While the neurotransmitter and the chemical components are extremely important, we are now learning more and more that the electrical activities in the brain is as important as these other areas that we've come to prove, that they too have a very important role in orchestrating the activities of the neuron. It's also important to mention that the side of the neuroscience where the electrical activities and the brainwaves frequencies are being primarily studied, in comparison to your traditional neuroscience, it's pretty young. It's actually in its infancy, more or less, because for the past decades and decades, the major focus within the neuroscience has been to studying the brainwaves. The neurons, action potential, neurotransmitters, different lobes, different regions of the brain. And of course, that's extremely important. The part that was primarily about electrical activities and brainwaves, it's about 100 years old, but it only started by the scientists categorizing it into 4 different frequency categories. For example, alpha, beta, gamma, etc. But they were majorly interested in it, for example, in the healthcare, where it had to do with in the healthcare, let's say epilepsy, for example. They were very, very obsessed with looking into brainwaves when it had to do with patients who had, for example, epilepsy, because they could clearly see the differences in electrical activities of the differences when, for example, patients suffered from those attacks. And it's only until maybe the past 10 years where scientists have become much more interested in studying the electrical activities of the brain to understand the brain as a whole, the way in which the traditional science have been designed to do. And so for that reason, we are still learning more and more about how active these brainwaves activities are to form ways in which the brain operates. And we are learning a lot more about the brain per se when we include the study of brainwaves activities in the traditional neuroscience. And the one part, for example, in which these electrical activities could potentially help us figure things out more and more about the brain is the information exchange, information transfer, information processing, which is one of my obsessions for many years. And that is, if you think about information, the way in which it's transferred, exchanged, and processed within the brain, obviously the neurons has a lot to do with it, but the way in which they could travel from one region of the brain to the other, it begs the question whether the brainwaves frequencies have something or a lot to do with that information transfer as well. This also begs the question for us to even define and understand what information even is, which also has been one of my long-time passion in terms of understanding how do we even define information. When we say the brain is processing information, what does that even mean? And every time I ask that question, no matter who it is, we always tend to, in the scientific community, we always tend to have different definitions for that. And so until the time we get to one way in which we can define data, information processing, we still be puzzled in terms of what that even is, how that even is extracted from by our brain, processed by our brain, interpreted, and then the outcome of it, what that information is. For example, right now you're watching this video, and obviously we're not physically connected, but there are all these wave-like electrons, electricity, if you will, and waves of information that transfers through the video onto your brain, and somehow miraculously they are being interpreted by the brain, whether we are aware of it or not, and we have internal triggers and responses to the information that we're receiving. All of that, it's still an enigma, and that's why the field of neuroscience is so extremely of this. Of course, it's still an enigma for us, and that's why we have so many scientists who are working on this, whether they are belonging to different institutions or where they are independent like me. And so it's very important to look at science, especially in this case neuroscience, as a dynamic, sort of fluid type of journey, if you will, because the more we learn about the brain, the more question we have. And of course, with the new era of AI and computational neuroscience is becoming extremely more and more intelligent to help us do a lot more testing and experimenting, so that we learn more and more about how the brain works. And all of this is, of course, extremely exciting, knowing how we evolved as human species, as we talked 2 videos ago about the evolution of the human intelligence and the fact that we are random species on this planet, mainly because of the extinction of dinosaurs and how we kind of evolved under all those very pressure and tough circumstances and environment. And that's why this journey is even more exciting, because we are, if you believe in evolution, these random species, and we are now sending stuff into space, and we are reading electrical activities of our brain, and not only our brain, our whole bodies, and is just extremely, extremely exciting. Yeah, so that's all I had for today. I hope you liked it, and feel free to subscribe, like, and share, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, bye.